Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Craig Hogan. Welcome, Craig. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. So let's go ahead and get started.
You bet. And for all of you out there listening or viewing, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. We're talking today about how the afterlife can help us negotiate our best lives now. And before you tune out or pass judgment, I want you to undertake to keep an absolutely open mind. I know I am really intrigued to hear more about this. And for those of you who don't know Dr. Hogan, he's the president and co-founder of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute and co-founder of Seek Reality Online. He's been a professor of business communications, a staff development administrator at a medical school and university, and founder of his own international business writing school. And he's been studying and writing about the afterlife and afterlife communication for over 30 years. So, Craig, this is a pretty unusual life pursuit. So I'd love to hear, how did you come to study the afterlife?
Well, I started it probably 25 or 30 years ago. And all of a sudden, I started meeting psychics. There were a lot of psychics in my life and mediums, and I was very surprised to see all of them. And as a result of that, then they started telling me things about myself. And they said, you have psychic ability. And since you have psychic ability, you'll be able to sit someplace and you'll be able to see things thousands of miles away. Wow. So I can sit in my office in Illinois and I can look at something on a website or on a desk someplace out in New Jersey, and I can see it and I'll sketch it and I'll send them the photograph, and then they'll send back their photograph of what it was, and it's always the same thing. So wow. I'm able to do that, and I realized then that there's something much more to reality than what we see, what's obvious to us. And as a result of that, then I started delving into the afterlife and what was happening with the life after this life, because I realized then the mind is not in the brain. And because the mind is not in the brain, that means that our minds continue after the body dies. And that taught me that the afterlife is a reality. The more I got into it, the more I realized it was true. And as a result of that, then I'm here today. I've written 8 books on the subject, and I'm teaching people how to have their own afterlife communications. So, and what we've discovered is once you understand the afterlife and you know what the afterlife is like, then that helps you in all of your life endeavors, including the negotiations you're involved in.
Yeah. Well, and I can't wait to roll up our sleeves and dig into this. So, but I mean, we got to know, a lot of people are very tunnel vision. So we're no doubt have some cynics in the crowd. And I know you've got a lot of evidence that you rely on about life after death. Can you share a little bit of that at first, just to maybe give people some context before we start digging in and applying it to negotiations?
Sure. We have all kinds of evidence now. And the evidence that we have is people coming back from the life after this life, and they come to their loved ones, people who know them well on this side of life. They come to them, they speak to them on this side of life, they tell them things that were going on in their lives before, they reminisce about them, and then they tell them things that are going on in their life now, what they did last night, what they did on the way to the meeting that they had with the medium. All of these things that show they're very much alive. And because of the fact that they're alive, they come to see us, they communicate with us, and all we have to do is to communicate with them because they're available to us.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, I certainly, I love that thought. I think anybody who's lost somebody important to them loves that thought. And I know when we first met, you raised a really interesting perspective that piqued my interest. And you suggested that knowing that there is a next life can help us negotiate better in this life. So I'd love if you could elaborate on that for us.
Yes, when in negotiations, it's important to come from a position of strength. So you must feel that you're strong. Yeah. You must have the sense that you're strong. You have the conviction that you're strong. Yeah. So that doesn't mean that you beat that person up, but what it does mean is that you come from a position in which you can accept things that happen without feeling like they're tragedies. They're issues that are going to truncate the negotiations. So in order to come to it, any of the negotiations that we come to from a position of strength, we have to understand that we are greater than the bodies. We are greater than what we can see around us. And since we know that that's true, and we know that we will be coming to the end of this life and will continue our lives after this life, everything in this life is a lesson. It's all a lesson to be learned. And so we can come from the position of, I'm going to go into this negotiation, I'm going to go into these discussions, and once we're into the discussions, it doesn't matter to me if I win. It's what's more important is that we negotiate something of substance between the two of us. Yeah. And when we come to that point, then we end up winning. We end up coming to something which is more effective for the two of us. But we do that by coming from a position of strength, knowing I'm an eternal being having a physical experience. I can negotiate with people, knowing that whatever happens, we can go to the next step and we can adjust whatever it is that we're doing, because I don't have to feel like my life depends on this. People get caught up in
Yeah.
negotiations. They have to feel like if they don't win, if they don't come up on top of this, then their lives are ruined. Something awful is going to happen. They
Yeah.
just have to get on the top of this. And what this does is to give them a perspective to say, no, this is just one lesson in your life. This is just one event that's happening. And once you go through this event, then you'll go into many others. But you don't have to worry about where you are in those events,
Yeah.
because of the fact that you are an eternal being and you will continue after the body dies.
Yeah, I found that interesting on so many levels because, as you know, and it really resonates with sort of my philosophy about negotiation and the name of this podcast and my book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. The
Mhm.
idea being that for so long we've been defined to see negotiations as this win-lose proposition. So I love this approach that you take where it takes some of that out of it. You're coming looking more for a collaborative experience, but also I gather what you're saying takes some of the stress out of the negotiation, which then allows you greater leverage. Would you agree?
Yes, and you look at every event in the negotiation, every step, every position that's taken in the negotiation as being a pivotal point. It's a point
Yeah.
at which you're going to go one direction or another. But there are changes in the process of the negotiation, and we can go with them. We can see that we are progressing, even though it appears that we didn't win that or we didn't get where we wanted to go with that. It's a new pivotal point. It's a point from which we can continue to negotiate. And so we're negotiating from a position of strength. And
Yeah.
as you said, we're trying to make consensus decisions. Consensus decisions are different from having the upper hand and winning an argument. Consensus decisions means that we both come down to a position at the end of the negotiation that we may not have foreseen at all. We may not have considered that possibility, but it's the best of both of us. It's the best of whoever's involved in the negotiations. And so it's something which is new, it's novel, we didn't expect it, but we're willing to go with it. And we then come to a consensus, even though one of us may say, well, I have my reservations about this, I'm not sure about it. Then they say, but let's go with it. We agree to this. And so everybody raises their hand and it's a consensus of everybody, not because everybody agrees with it entirely, but because of the fact that they agree that we are going to go at this together. We are a partnership. We are going to make this successful. We're going to make this go. And so we can do that if everybody is positioned from a feeling like, I don't have to have my way. I don't have to be the person who's on top. I don't have to win this battle.
Yeah.
Instead of saying that, say that we are eternal beings having a physical experience together. We're on this journey together. We are people who should be loving, should be feeling this camaraderie with each other. And if we do that, then we can come to a conclusion, a negotiation that will even surprise both of us that that was something that we came to because we did it as a partnership together.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I mean, it's so much of what you're saying is consistent again with my whole philosophy about negotiation and my mission to change how we look at it. 'Cause I think we've been so conditioned to define power as power over other people, which is very different than coming to a negotiation with this idea about having power with, coming together and having that combined power. And I like that you keep using the word that surprise, because I think so many people come to negotiations going, I want X and you want Y, and we think we're fighting about that. So either one gets
Right.
X or one gets Y, or we split the baby. But I love this approach you're bringing, and I'm a big believer of it as well, that when we take away that need to just get our X or get our Y and open ourselves to be a little more vulnerable, a little more collaborative, sometimes incredible openings, when we get away from that attachment to that idea, there are solutions that are better. It's not even a compromise like, oh, I'm not happy with this. There are
Right.
better opportunities out there if we open ourselves. So I'd love if you could talk about maybe some of the blocks that interfere with the best negotiated outcomes, that a recognition of an afterlife might help push through those blocks. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. One of them is the belief that I must have this, I must get this my way because this is all there is to life. And
Yeah.
if I'm successful in what I'm doing now, my life's a failure. It's over.
Yeah.
So I've got to win. I've got to be on top of things. It has to be my way or the highway. And that's a result of the fact that we believe that this life is only all there is to life. that after we leave this life, there is nothing afterwards
Yeah.
or nothing of any value. And as a result of that, then we feel like we are invested in this life and have to get things the way we want them to be. When we release that and we say to ourselves, I am an eternal being, you are as well. We're on this journey together. And in the end, if we work on this together, if we bring ourselves into this with full cooperation, with regard for each other, with love for each other, then we will eventually come to something which will be a wonderful outcome for everybody involved. And we will have interpersonal relationships that build and make it make it easier to have negotiations, because we've built these interpersonal relationships with this regard for each other and concern for each other. And so knowing that we are eternal beings having a physical experience gives us that insight, gives us that perspective that allows us to negotiate with people as partners, as people who are in this together, who are going to be delighted by what we come out with in the end.
Yeah. And I'm loving this. And I mean, I confess it took a little, I'm like, because at first that knee-jerk reaction that we all have is right, like, oh, it seems so woo-woo. And yet, interestingly, many of the things back in the 1960s that people thought were woo-woo, now the science has caught up to support so much of it. And it turns out they were right all along. So I definitely approach with this more open perspective. And so certainly I'm in the business now of trying to transform how people think about this. You clearly are in the business of sort of transformational thinking. And I'd love if you could share, like, what's the greatest lesson maybe about the afterlife that you've learned about transformation in this life?
The most important thing to realize is that this life is not all there is. We're not encapsulated in this little brief period of our lives. And so we mustn't feel, there's no need to feel that we have to have everything the way that we want it to be in this life. That somehow whatever our perspective is must be accepted by others and by those with whom we're negotiating. And if we realize that there are other things that will happen, we're going to be going from one episode to another, from one pivotal point to another. And as we change, if we pivot with those who are involved so that we're all pivoting together, then we can make those changes. We can try different things. We can find negotiated settlements that are going to be to the benefit of everybody. But if we do that, if we have this perspective that this life is a journey, we're on it together, we are co-travelers, we're brothers and sisters in this life, then we can approach other people with the understanding that what we come up with is going to improve our interpersonal relationships together. We're going to have more love and compassion for others and for those who are involved. And we're going to be able to come up with a solution, with a negotiation that it's going to be so much better. It's going to be a delight when we all come down to it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that word pivot really struck me too, because I think so many of the problems we have in our negotiations, whether personally or professionally or all the spaces in between, is that attachment to what we think the outcome has to look like. And so much of it, I think, comes down to mindset, right? And I often say that our first and most important negotiation is negotiating our mindset, negotiating with ourselves. And I'd love if you have any insights from your work that maybe could help with that important first negotiation, negotiating our own mindset.
Yeah, the first and most important thing is to be willing to put all the cards on the table. So in other words, when we come into the negotiation, we come in and say, no, I have my bias. I think that it should be like this. Yeah. And someone else would say, well, I'm biased in the other direction. I don't think it should be like that at all. I think it should be the way that I see it. And when all our cards are on the table, then we can say, now, let's put all these cards together and see what kind of a hand we come up with. And we'll see whether we can come up with something among us that is going to be much better than any of us could have thought it was before we entered these negotiations. So that's willingness to come into it and say, this is where I stand. This is where I am. But that doesn't mean that I have to stay there. It doesn't mean that I'm going to defend that against all odds. What it means is I want everybody to know where I stand, and now we can go on to a consensus decision. Consensus decision-making means we may not all agree with it, but we're all willing to go for it. We're all willing to be as partners to make this successful, and so we all raise our hands. In a consensus meeting, everybody raises their hand, but that doesn't mean everybody agrees with the decision. Yeah. It means that we're all willing to support the decision. So in consensus decision-making, we put all of our cards on the table, we say where we are, we compare notes with each other, we're willing to give up some things that we want so that we all come down to something, a consensus in which we agree, we're going to go for this together. This is our decision now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my goodness, who knew you and I were so aligned on so many things? Who knew? And it's interesting now that I'm thinking about that. I'm sort of speaking of putting your cards on the table.
Mhm,
I was known as the Barracuda in my law practice for many years, which of course my
mhm.
clients meant as a compliment. And, I realized too late, to be honest, later than I would like. It's embarrassing to me how long it took me to have my epiphany to realize what a cost comes with that. And I think
Yes.
the big shift for me, ironically, took place. My dad died at only 52 years old of a heart attack. It was unexpected. And I'd never really thought of it until this moment, actually, Craig, that was, I think, one of the beginnings of the shift for
Mhm.
me, at least. So who knows? Maybe I opened up to
So
sort of a
it is.
perception of the afterlife without even realizing that was at play.
Right. It's a life lesson. So
Yeah.
we're always learning lessons every day. So we can look at our days and say, what lesson did I learn today?
Yeah.
And when we do that, then we are surprised to see, yes, I did learn something today. I learned about something, that other person, and how what I thought was wrong is really just a different viewpoint. And so then each life lesson then is something which draws us into being more of the person we came to Earth to be,
Yeah.
because we planned this ahead of time. We planned being here. Our souls planned it for us. And so now that we're here, we're learning lessons, and we can help each other learn lessons, and we can make of this something which is fruitful for all of us. And in the end, we all will become better people. We'll have better relationships. We'll have better jobs. We'll have better lives, if we're willing to come to it with the perspective that we are sojourners. We are journers together in this perspective. And as a result of that, then we can negotiate, and we'll come up with something that we all love.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this idea of learning as well, and with that necessarily means we need to be open. And,
Yes.
let's speak to the elephant in the room. I think we are in such a polarizing, probably an almost unprecedented polarization of people's position. People are so convinced about the
Mhm.
correctness of their position and the need to be correct about their position. And one of the things I certainly talk about in my book is this idea about empathy in the true sense, like truly seek to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, seek to understand and ideally meet the needs of the other person, even and especially when we disagree. And I love that you speak about cards on the table. I have one piece where I actually talk about we are so conditioned to hold
Mhm.
our cards really close to our
Yeah.
chest in
Right.
negotiation, that a skilled negotiator will never give anything up. It's like a poker
Mhm.
game. And
Mhm.
I find the opposite is true. I believe when we come with vulnerability, when we come exactly as you described, Craig, saying, hey, here's what I believe this is going to look like. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, let me hear about your position. That is a game changer in getting those more creative outcomes and solutions. That's
Yes, right. We have to assume the fact that the ideal solution is not there, but it's going to be given birth in our little group
Mm,
meeting, in our meeting with each other.
yeah.
We don't know what it's going to look like when it comes out, but it's going to be given birth there, and we're going to, when at the end of it, when we are in a consensus decision making mode, and we've all raised our hand, we agree to go with this, then we can shake each other's hands. We can embrace each other. We can show our relationships with each other have been strengthened. We're actually better able to then cope with things in the future. And the
Mm,
more we're able to do that, that more that we as individuals are able to do that, then we are going to become stronger. We're going to have better relationships. We're going to be better able to negotiate. And then we're going to be housing that ability within our group. So our group or the team or whatever it is that we're part of, that becomes stronger. And
yeah.
so then the decisions that we make as a team and the decisions we make as individuals are all stronger, and we benefit from it. It gets better and better.
I love it. And so much of our conditioning teaches us exactly the opposite, right? I believe that almost everything we've learned about negotiation are based on myths, not the least of which is emotion has no place in negotiation. I mean, we are human, we are emotional beings. And yeah, you don't want to necessarily be emotional and have a meltdown, but you want to bring the emotion of your deep why, if
Yes.
nothing else. So I'd love your thoughts on what role emotion maybe plays in negotiation.
Yeah, emotion is very important. Emotion is what guides us in our lives. We go from one event to another. We make decisions about things based upon how it feels for us,
Yeah.
even though we may not realize that that's true. but emotions drive us. Emotions take us from one point to another. So if we can accept the fact that we can be in a group and we can have strong emotions about something, and we can very much vehemently dislike something, but at the same time, we can put that on the table. That's one of the cards. I feel strongly about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a hard time with the opposite. And so then to be able to say, all of the members of the group say, that's a valuable perspective. That's a perspective we need. I'm glad that we know that you're very solidly behind that, that you're angry if you don't get it. And those feelings, those emotions then become one of the cards that are going to be on the table. And then you can use that. And you can say at the end of it, now, George, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this new decision? And George can say, well, I'm just worried about it, but let's see how it goes. And I'm in agreement with everybody about it. But our emotions are very important, and they should be on the table.
Yeah. And I love that. And added to that, I'd say, like, I think we tend to be, and again, part of that conditioning, when somebody, when the other party, starts getting emotional, they get angry, they bring emotion to, we immediately, like, we push ourselves back. And to me, that's when you lean in. There is gold there, right? When you lean into the messiness and go, okay, this seems to have really triggered a response. I'm curious. Can you tell me about that? What's happening right now? What's at play? That's where you uncover a lot of those buried cards that can make the difference. So
yes, that's very wise. And people are not taught to do that. The schools fail us. The schools teach us competitiveness. They teach us it's us against them. It's the boys against the girls. It's the shirts against the skins. It's competitiveness. And so they never really teach people how to come together, young people, how to come together and have this consensus decision making, because of the fact that they value everybody who's in the group, everybody who's part of the team. And they don't teach people how to address their own emotions, to say, I'm very angry about this. No, let me see why I'm angry. What is it about this? And then you can bring that up as one of the cards on the table. Say, I'm very angry about this possibility. I don't want this to happen. And then you say, what is it, George, that is about that really triggers you? Because we need to consider that in our negotiations. Emotions are very important, and we need to put those cards on the table. And then we need to learn how to do that through our own devices. The schools, unfortunately, do not teach it. They are really failing in their ability to teach people to have cohesive relationships with each other, real relationships in which they can share emotions, in which they can share positions. And they really need to start doing that. It's important that they start doing it.
Yeah. And interesting as you say that, I think not just our schools, certainly, and also our media. I mean, when I think of most of the top TV shows now, they really reinforce that in it for me, that competitive model, right? Win at all cost, no holds bar, the ends justify the means. It like piles on and layers a lot of that misinformation. And yeah, I really love that point.
One of our favorite shows is Suits.
Oh, yes.
Love it, Suits. And it's a dog eat dog world. And and they're doing exactly what we say that they shouldn't be doing. And I mean, that's part of the profession. But at the same time, if young people, children should realize that instead of trying to get what you want, in order to have the life that you want, in order to be happy, in order for me to be happy, it doesn't mean that other people have to do what I want them to do. It doesn't mean that I have to get my way. And it can learn how to have consensus negotiations, but we have to teach them young.
Yeah. And you're right. Shows like Suits, my gosh, they glorify everything that is wrong with that approach, right? And I want to circle back because you said something that really caught my attention. You talked about that we need to, part of that consensual process is listening or hearing everybody, I think you'd said. And I think we are such an extrovert driven society. It's like those loudest voices are the ones getting heard and dominating. And I believe we miss out on so much. Like introverts have so much great value to offer the conversation. But when we're all about hearing our own voices and ego driven, I think we miss out on so many fabulous opportunities for better outcomes and solutions, from the personal to the professional to the global, frankly. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, it ends up suppressing. So it's worse than simply not hearing. It's actually suppressing it. So that people learn, I can't bring this up. I know it's going to happen. They're all going to come after me. I'm not going to be able to say this. And so they suppress what they're feeling and thinking. And as you say, it is mostly the introverts. Extroverts don't know what they think until they say it. And they're involved in it. They're engaged in it. Introverts, not so much though. They want to consider things and think about them before deciding what they want to say about it. They don't know what they think until they've sat and thought about it for a while. But all of the people involved in negotiations must feel like they can say whatever is on their minds, and that the others there are going to accept that it's going to become part of this wonderful negotiation. We should look at the negotiation process as creating. It's rather like giving birth to a baby. It's rather like having a flower that comes up out of a green bush, and this is going to come out of it. We don't know what that flower is going to look like. So when we come to it and realize that, then we share these together, then we have successes. So in this team meeting, we had this success, and that brings the whole group together. And the group then is more willing to share with each other. They learn that they can share, and they don't have to worry about anybody else coming down on them for it. And so as a result of that, then they share better, they share more, and we all enjoy the process. And at the end of it all, we are very close to each other. And that's the goal of this life. That's why we're on earth. We're on earth for three reasons: to learn lessons, to grow in love and compassion, and to have fun. And so everything that we should go into, every negotiation that we should go into, we should say, what am I getting out of this? What am I learning from this? How is this increasing my love and compassion for everybody else in the room? And are we having fun? Are we enjoying the process together? And if you could say all those three of those things are true, then you have a good negotiation.
Oh, that is so good. My gosh, where were you 37 years ago when I started the practice of law? Because, and Frank, you should get out to I think the legal community, the business community with that message. I love that three framework. And I bet the vast majority of people rarely have fun or even think about the possibility of having fun in their negotiations. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, it's very important. We have to realize the fact that we are here to enjoy ourselves. It should be a playground for us. We talk about being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. We're never thrown out. We're in it. It's just that we don't realize it or take advantage of it. And so then what we need to do is we need to enjoy ourselves, and we need to have fun with other people and make them feel boosted, make them feel important, and not necessarily feel like we have to have our way.
Imagine what a different world it would be if we all took that approach. And it's so simple, so simple. Now, some of it you've touched on, sort of circle, but if we want to put a pin in it, what would you see as the key reasons that negotiations fail typically?
Negotiations fail because of the people believe that they must have their own way, that there's only one perspective. And it really is more than just a feeling. It isn't that they're taking a position, I must have my own way. It's that they are in a box. They don't realize that they're in a box. And so they're negotiating out of what their box is. And so then they don't even see that they're in the box. And as a result of that, then because of the fact that people are not willing to look at their own box with a perspective, then they feel like they must have it this way. And if they don't have it this way, then life's going to end, that things are awful and they're going to be deteriorating as a result of it. And so because of the fact that they are not seeing out of the box, they're not looking outside at all of the other things that are happening and they're not willing to look at other people's boxes, at what other people are, where they are. And it's the fact that people are coming in negotiations out of their own needs instead of having their own needs simply openly stated and accepted by the group, that we have the problems in negotiations.
So good. So good. And again, you've probably touched on a lot of this, but just to sort of put a pin on it, what would you say are the key skills or hallmarks that make for a great negotiator?
Listening is the first and most important. Being able to then listen and restate. We should be teaching people how to listen, how to restate, how to ask questions that help to clarify instead of making statements that are in opposition. Asking questions to clarify, and then being able to use that to come back to a problem-solving process in which we all bring all of our cards, put them all on the table, and once they're all on the table, then we compare notes, and we are happy to see other people's cards, even though they're very different from ours, and we're able to realize that their differences are the strength of our team. Their differences are the strengths of what we have. And so the more differences we have in the group, the stronger the group is. But we have to make it strong. We have to accept its strength. If we don't, if we are in a competitive mode continually, then we will not get to that point of having that wonderful camaraderie.
Oh, so good. And interestingly, a lot of recent studies totally support that point you're making about our differences as well, that you get more productivity, more creativity. The more differences, the more tension, the better the outcomes that you get. I think that's just beautiful. And it's funny when you're saying about listening and reflecting back. One of the things I often talk about is what I call elevated active listening, where not only do you reflect back what the other person has said, but you do it in a way that is even more gracious than how they frame the position themselves, which I think is not done very often. And it really can be such a powerful game changer. So I love that idea. Now, I would be remiss if I did not ask, and I'm sort of changing directions here, but given that you sort of specialize in the afterlife, when we talk about negotiating end of life for loved ones, that one of the things that just sort of struck me, I mean, it causes such grief and such tension, and people are so ill-equipped for it. I'd love if you could share any insights you have for our listeners about some tips on, or, even sort of our mindset approach when we're negotiating the end of the life for people that we love and care about.
Well, I do have a number of things that I would like to say about that. One of them is that we should be able to have the end of our life at home, in our beds, with our loved ones, with our family around us. That doesn't mean we don't get medications that we get in a hospice. It does mean that we have all of those things that we need, the medications that we need, but we have it a peaceful ending. We shouldn't be in a huge hospital hooked up to tremendous machines to keep ourselves alive 2 or 3 days longer. There's something very wrong with that. And that was the truth in even up to the 19th and 20th centuries, that people would die at home and they would do it among their loved ones. And it was very peaceful, a very peaceful time. So one of the things is that it's important that we allow ourselves to have a good dying. And that means that we are willing to accept the fact that we're going to die and we're just going to go on to the next stage of life. It's like from childhood into adolescence, it's just another stage. And so when we go into that next stage of life, we will have a reunion with all the people that we love there. And if we see that the end of life is just a transition, it's just a graduation, then we can accept it differently than we are accepting it now. And certainly as far as keeping people alive for a few more weeks and they're having a terrible quality of life, their lives are just miserable, then it really isn't fair to them. And if they just realize the fact that they are going to just graduate into the next realm of their life, then they don't need to worry about it. Nobody should fear death. There's nothing to fear about the death process. It's just a graduation.
Graduation. I love that concept. That's awesome. Craig, this has been super, super interesting, and just incredible little nuggets about negotiation, which I think most people would not have associated with an afterlife specialist, a doctor of the afterlife. So I normally like to end by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? And it doesn't even have to be on this topic, just something that changed how you thought about the world or how you're showing up differently, an aha moment for you.
Yeah, the biggest mind shift that I ever had is to realize that what we see around us, this reality that is apparent to us, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, this reality is not the real reality. That our real reality, our real home, is outside of where we are now. And we mustn't take this all so seriously. This is not that important. And we can enjoy ourselves with each other. We can have fun, we can learn lessons, we can grow in love and compassion. All we need to do is to stop making it so ingenuous. Just the fact that the people are so concerned about their own lives and so concerned about where they're going. But we can just have fun with each other if we just relax ourselves into it.
Oh, so beautiful. What a great shift. And tell our listeners, for everybody again, we've been speaking with Dr. Craig Hogan here, and tell our listeners where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, you can go to seekreality.com, seekreality.com, and it has information about me, and it has a biography, and it has some of my presentations. So I'd invite you to get on it. And if you have any other questions, please send me an email because I would answer them.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes, as well as all the information about Dr. Hogan's many books as well. And thank you so much, Craig. This has been so much fun, and I got some great value out of it. So thank you for
Thank you. Thank you.
And for our listeners, I'm sure you got lots of value from this, and I bet it was a surprise for you, a pleasant surprise from what you thought when I told you what we were going to be discussing. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that, and make sure to share this episode with anyone that you think could get some value from this message. And let's face it, anytime we can up-level how we show up to have a better life and get better outcomes, negotiate our best life, who can't benefit from that message? And before we sign off today, just wanted to share some ways that we can work together. If you happen to be looking to up-level your negotiation skills to negotiate your best life, I have everything from online to group to signature, one-on-one mastermind and VIP experiences to help you leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve. So if that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com, and be sure to grab a copy of my book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.